Being a professional fighter at the highest level is a tough job. These guys and gals put themselves through the most extreme forms of physical training to prepare for battle. When you've got a sport with so many technical and psychological elements, you're bound to get some hilarious pre-fight rituals that somehow work for the fighters. So buckle up, because we'll be doing a deep dive into the strangest of these rituals today. First up, weight cut. We gotta start with the most obvious one on our list. Weight cutting is an old-school wrestling practice that allows the athletes to reduce their weight for a few hours when they step on the scale and rehydrate afterward. The concept of weight cutting only used to exist in combat sports, and it was a way of getting an advantage over your opponent by appearing lighter on the scale than you naturally were. However, this practice took over in other sports as well, for instance, boxing and even point fighting, although these athletes don't do it on an extreme level. When the first UFC event was held, there weren't any weight classes, and not many commissions sanctioned it. The rules weren't fully developed, and people were allowed to wear a gi or even shoes. But as the sport developed, a number of weight classes were created, and weight cutting was so widely adopted that it became a necessity. To this day, most fighters are against this practice, but have to do it anyway because everyone else is. The health issues caused by big weight cuts are extremely brutal. They affect the athlete's ability to perform and their endurance. We've seen so many cases of fighters passing out during weight cuts or having to be hospitalized. It's rougher than you think, which is why Uncle Chael called this practice sanctioned cheating, and it's hard to argue with that. The nipple grabbing. We couldn't talk about the strange habits of fighters without going through this one. Imagine you're the best fighter on the face of planet Earth, fighting the most worthy opponent in the world with millions watching at home at the biggest stage possible, but as they announce your name, you salivate your hands and grab your own nipples. Don't know about you, but it sounds like the weird nightmares we have every once in a while. Well, it's actually happened in real life too. The most notable examples are GSP and Rashad Evans. The thought behind this practice is that when they're on such a big stage and the stakes are so high, the pressure becomes harder to deal with. But if you touch your own nipples on live TV, you've already done the most embarrassing thing anyone could think of. Not even losing the fight could top that. As strange as it sounds, it's a pretty smart solution to help with the nerves. Picturing your opponent naked isn't going to help here because, well, he already is. Next, we have refraining from physical relationships. It's an old-school boxing superstition that the fighter can't engage in any form of sexual activity prior to a bout. It was believed that it weakens your ability to take a punch. It's like Mickey told Rocky, women weaken legs. As weird as that sounds, most people believed it when they heard it, and this became a common practice among all fighters. It was years later that this practice was rendered useless by a number of fighters who had done their own experiments. High-level fighters like GSP, TJ Dillashaw, and Dustin Poirier have spoken up about it and have said that they've had sex the night before the fight, but it didn't affect their performance at all. Even though there's no medical evidence behind it, people still follow this strange rule just to be safe. Getting slapped in the face. Ah, the good old face slaps. The perfect way to get hyped up before getting into a fight. It's so common that it doesn't even seem weird now. Right before stepping into the octagon during the walkout, one of the cornermen steps up and slaps their fighter a few times. They're not the hardest slaps that might cause a concussion, but they are enough to get you fired up before you face a killer. Clay Guida comes to mind when you think about face slaps. There are multiple compilation videos of him being slapped pretty hard by his coaches. Whatever works, right? Now for the switch into beast mode. Not all fighters are violent knuckleheads who like hurting people. Of course, we've got Sean Strickland, but he's just one of a kind. Most professional fighters are just normal people who love their families and want to make an honest living, but the job they've got requires a level of aggression and violent intentions that you can't live with all the time. For that reason, most fighters flip the switch from their normal selves to a killer right before they make the walk. The process is different for all fighters. Cub Swanson's famous pre-fight ritual of sitting in the corner of a room comes to mind. He'd sit quietly without interacting with anyone and think of the time in his life when he was meaner and more violent. He spent his early years involved in drugs, crime, and even spent time in juvie. Going through those times helps him access the killer inside him and get him ready for war. Corey Sandhagen explained that his process of switching is a lot slower. As the training camp progresses, he gets less social, limits his relationships with family and friends, and slowly taps into the mindset that allows him to hurt people. This explains how all our favorite fighters with their jolly personalities do what they gotta do in the cage, and once the fight's done, they're back to normal. Hanging rope touch. Jan Blachowicz story of rising to the top after falling short many times and becoming a UFC champion has inspired fans all over the world. But the key to the legendary Polish power comes from something a little extra that he's had for the last few years. Just so you know the story, Jan was walking around in his hometown when he found a man who had committed suicide by hanging himself from a tree. He called the cops, and when they arrived at the scene, they told him that he should take the rope the deceased person used to take his life. Since he he was the one who discovered the body, the rope would bring him luck. As dark as it may sound, Jan went on to carry this rope with him at every fight and kept winning and getting KOs till he finally became a champion. The weirdest thing about this? His last fight was against Glover Teixeira, in which he lost his belt. Turns out, he didn't bring the rope with him that time. Doesn't sound like a coincidence. Do you think it might hold some truth? Let us know in the comments. We can't forget getting wasted. One of the most shocking pre-fight rituals was announced by Johnny Bones Jones in an episode of Joe Rogan's podcast. John had been untouchable in his MMA career to that point. He rose to the top instantly and became the youngest UFC champion in history. He was for sure one of the most special talents the Octagon had ever seen. It was his fight with Alexander Gustafsson that we saw him struggle for the first time. Many rumors started circulating after the fight that John hadn't trained properly for that fight. John went on to address those rumors a few years later. He told Rogan he had a ritual that 1 week before the fight he would party so hard and would get absolutely wasted. He did that so he could have a built-in excuse in case he ever lost. That way he could still look at himself in the mirror. That sounds like a foolish thing to do to most people. Like, John, why don't you just train properly and do everything right? That way it's less likely you'll lose. But on the other hand, isn't that the most gangster move you've ever seen? The guy's fighting the best fighters in the world without training properly and not refraining from alcohol or other drugs and still kicking everyone's ass. There's only one John Jones, ladies and gentlemen. No one else could pull that off. Finally, the Billy Strut. Saved the best for last. In the world of combat sports, Conor McGregor has achieved a level of stardom that no one could have imagined for an MMA fighter. Fans love everything about Conor. His trash talk, his personality, his sleeper of a left hand, and his iconic walkouts that will surely get you out of your seats. Conor got into the habit of doing the billionaire strut as he entered the cage, a move that has also been used by Vince McMahon, who, of course, is actually a billionaire. This ritual of Conor went so viral that people started copying that in their lives too. Imagine playing a game of charades and you have to act out Conor McGregor. What would you do? The answer's probably doing the strut, just like Wonderboy Thompson did. We know what we're in for when there's a McGregor fight. The notorious Big E would start playing. We'll see the death stare into the camera and, of course, walking with the rubber arms. Simply iconic. That's a wrap for this video. Which pre-fight ritual did you find the most weird? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you in the next one.